fine.
Oh, holy.
It's not so bad. Smells like discipline.
What?
Now, most of you probably know that I'm a big comic guy. Whether it's Marvel Comics or DC Comics, I will most likely tune in if it interests me enough. And one of the characters I've always kind of been fascinated with her story is Harley Quinn. And when there can be a different story kind of added to who she is, then it can make for a whole interesting read. So when I found these books by author Rachel Allen, I knew I had to check them out. It is a trilogy of books called Reckoning, Ravenous, and the most recent one, the third and final in the entry, Redemption, where we kind of get this different story of Harley Quinn. In the first book, she's 17 years old. She's in between a gap year for college and stuff. She's trying to work her way, get a degree into Arkham U because she has no money to pay for it. So the only way she gets in is if she gets a degree. And throughout that whole first book, her and characters Bernice, Jasmine, Kylie, and Bianca join what is called The Reckoning, which is basically like their girl group. You know, there's these girls gone missing, and then they're dying when they are found, so they're trying to figure out who is behind this and why. And we find out that Stella, Bernice's sister, was attacked by this so-called serial killer, or whatever you want to call him, and she is currently locked up in a loony bin, so we get to meet her. Kylie does perish in this story, so you don't ever see her again. However, her name is mentioned a couple times through the other books. Turns out, by the end of it, it was Harley's professor, Dr. Nelson, who was doing all this because he was getting these shipments in from Dr. Crane with what is basically the fear-induced toxins that you know about Scarecrow using. I like this story because it's kind of the beginning of it all. We see how Harley kind of lives, you know, she's living with her father in this story because she's still technically underage and can't live on her own without parental guidance. And you find out that he's very abusive, and all he does is really work all day and tells Harley, make me dinner when I get home. And he does end up dying because he gets the shit kicked out of him because he owes money to bad people, and he ends up having a heart attack in the process.
Oh no, me heart stopped! I'm fucking dying!
Now Harley is kind of on her own, even though she's not 18 years old yet, but it's okay because she does get that scholarship to Arkham U, so at least she's got some place to live because she's got dorms and all that. And then, right at the end, Poison Ivy, or Pamela Isley, comes into the story, as her and Harley kind of had a small interaction at the end of book 1, kind of teasing that, okay, from here on out, Poison Ivy is going to play a big part in this story. And of course in book 2, now that Harley has a scholarship, she's, you know, going out doing her thing, but she's finding out again there's something fishy still going on, and there's one guy she ends up being suspicious of, and that is Dr. Crane, who they don't know that he's the one doing all this to the girls with the fear toxins and stuff like that. They just know that someone called the Scarecrow's doing it, and of course if you're a Batman fan or a comic book fan, you know that it's Dr. Jonathan Crane, so it was no surprise when you found out it was him at the end. And this is also interesting because you see a lot of the villains in this one too, whether small or big roles, as Talia al Ghul plays a big role kind of mentoring Harley, being like, look, I know who you truly are, you just gotta let it out. And then she has another interaction with the Joker, just like she did in the first movie, having a small interaction with him. The Riddler pops up a little bit, you got Two-Face, and then there's King Shark, who later actually plays a bigger role than you would think he does, as he kind of befriends Harley, as Harley realizes, you know, he's not this, you know, big monster, he's just this friendly, gentle giant who only gets violent because he's got shark tendencies, but she helps him find ways to control it. This is also when Harley Quinn starts to become Harley Quinn and not just Harleen Quinzel, as during a spout with Talia al Ghul and others, she ends up falling into a pit of acid, kind of, you know, losing her memory for a little while, but eventually getting it back. And she's stuck in this love triangle with this boy Winfield, and of course Pamela Isley, who she realizes she has a thing for, and she realizes that with her and Winfield, it just doesn't feel real, so they break up. And the funny thing is, you never hear from him again. I kind of thought he would have a bigger part to play in the story, especially maybe the third book. No, this is like the last you hear from him from here on out.
I don't want to play with you anymore.
And by the end of the second book, Dr. Crane gets taken into Arkham because they find out he's been doing bad things, and all the bad guys have escaped. So now they're out and about again, and Harley and Ivy decide to become, girlfriends, and that's kind of where the second book ends, leading into the third, which is Redemption. And with Redemption, I will say, if you're going to read this book, there's definitely going to be a trigger warning, as there is a lot of body modification stuff and a lot of abuse taking place here. Now, don't get me wrong, the first two books are dark in itself, but when I was reading the third book, there was moments where I was definitely like, ugh, like I felt not necessarily dirty reading it, but like picturing the whole body modification stuff in my head. It's just disturbing. I'm not a big fan of that type of stuff. Even in horror movies, when they do it, I kind of get a little like, okay, I don't really want to see it nor picture it. So when I'm sitting there reading what I'm reading, I'm just kind of like, oh, this is disturbing. And you're probably wondering, body modification, what the hell are you talking about? Wasn't the guy doing this trafficking of these girls caught? Well, yes and no. There's still another person behind this trafficking stuff. They call him the Doll Maker, who has also teamed up with the Mad Hatter to kind of lure these girls in, and they either auction them off after they chip them and control them, or they chip them and control them and they become an Alice for the Mad Hatter, because that's just what the Mad Hatter does. And of course, the Doll Maker has his eyes set on Harley, not necessarily because, oh, he's stalking her because he's in love with her, but he feels like there's some sort of connection there. They can work together and he can turn her into what she wants to. And also going on is Harley and Ivy are trying to find a cure for Harley, or not necessarily a cure, but since Poison Ivy has toxin, especially on her lips, they can't, do the thing that people in relationships do, and that is kiss, because it would end up killing Harley.
I'm dying.
Oh shit, without me?
And of course, when they finally find a way to do that is when Harley gets taken by the Doll Maker. Now, that ended up being planned by her, because in the end, the Doll Maker took Stella, Bernice's sister, which Bernice at this point in time is in jail because she took the blame for hurting Dr. Nelson and almost killing him to kind of help Harley out. And Harley promised that she would visit Stella regularly and see Stella. So Harley and Stella are basically friends at this point, and she does not want to see her get hurt. So she said, I will trade myself in if you let Stella go. However, this is when the Doll Maker started playing his mind tricks.
Fuck you! You just got pranked!
You also see the return of Bianca and Jasmine, as we find out Bianca is actually the daughter of Bane. So now she's just all like jacked and shit, and she works for Talia al Ghul. And Jasmine has actually been taken by the Doll Maker. That was another reason Harley wanted to kind of get captured, was to also, find Jasmine and not just let her and Stella go, find a way to break them out, but everybody who has been taken by these weirdos. And then this is kind of where the rest of the book gets disturbing, because outside of him sending Harley dolls of, some of the, girls that he has transformed in a way, now she's seeing it with her own eyes, and she's kind of wondering when she is going to get transformed and if she's even going to survive the whole ordeal. All this while we're also kind of getting a story from this girl named Everly, who is one of the Alices that the Mad Hatter is keeping. And then of course we also get Ivy's, kind of perspective as she tries to look for Harley, because when you read these books, this is being narrated and told in, Harley's perspective. It's her talking, so they kind of have to split up to let you know, like, okay, this is who's talking now, this is whose perspective you're seeing it from. So you can get caught a little off guard, but it's, it's pretty interesting still. And in this story, Harley has a bunch of close calls. She almost gets chipped. However, it's found out that Fallon, who is a 7-year-old girl who's been transformed into like this. So Harley had a couple of close calls, including almost being chipped, but we find out that Lenore, who's kind of like another, girl in there who's been transformed into like this bird person.
Not quite a bird, not quite a person. Maybe what matters is to love yourself first and soar.
Had a false chip put in, one that didn't work, so they got one for her that did work, and in this case, Lenore actually ends up getting the bad chip out so that way they can switch it and put it in Harley. That way it's like, okay, they realize she's got a chip, the doll maker and Mad Hatter, but they're not supposed to realize it's not working, as Harley's supposed to play along and act like she's being controlled in some way. Throughout this time, she runs into Jasmine, who she finds out that the doll maker has turned into a cyborg.
I am SpongeTron.
It gets to a point where they see Jasmine get chipped, so they think, oh, she's not one to trust anymore, because now everybody, especially the people who aren't chipped, are trying to escape this place, come up with an escape route, because it can't just be one person trying to escape, it has to be everybody. And Harley kind of had a failed escape attempt herself in, you know, the early portions of this story when she is in this lair, I guess you can call it. Turns out though, since Jasmine is a cyborg, when they put the chip in her without realizing, she disintegrated the chip because she's just that powerful. And there's this part that ends up playing a big role at the end where Harley says, well, is there any way, you know, since, you know, you are a cyborg, you basically have computers, is there any way you can send text or email to Ivy and this person to let them know where I am? To which Jasmine says, well, there is a firewall. It's very hard to get past, but I can try. And, you know, they come up with this plan to escape this, that, and the other. And by the end of it, when they're fighting the Mad Hatter, everybody else who's been controlled, you find out that, oh, these people have been de-chipped. So now they're on Harley and the other people's side, and you see vines coming through the window insinuating that, well, Ivy knows where Harley is, or found out where Harley is, and it turns out that Jasmine was able to break that firewall and contact Ivy, Bianca, Montoya, the police, you know, everybody you can think of in this sense was contacted, and they found out where they were and were able to not just save Harley, but save the other girls that have survived this ordeal. And Harley's still trying to figure out what she even wants to do with her life, other than, you know, she does want to go to Gotham U. She wants to continue doing the, you know, whole vigilante thing, because she kind of stopped doing it in the second book because she wanted to keep her career going, so she ditched the Reckoning. She decides to buy this abandoned candy place that her and Ivy went to as like a date night beforehand, and she turned it into a home for the abandoned girls, as some of these girls who were overage couldn't necessarily be adopted and didn't have a place to stay, and some were kids, but because they had these special abilities from the transformations, they didn't necessarily trust people coming in to adopt them because they didn't want anybody taking advantage of them. She names the building after Kylie, and everybody decides that this is a good idea, and they go along with it. We go to a year later in the story. Everything's going well and better than expected. Harley and Ivy are living a happily ever after, as is everybody else. It's a nice and wholesome story, and I think you gotta get through a lot in the third book to really get to the happy ending, because there are definitely points where you're just like, ew! Dude! What the fuck? But once you get past that and get to everything else, you definitely just continue reading, because it's just so addicting. Like, when I read books, it's usually sporadic reads, but I think I finished each of these books in like 2 or 3 days, just because I was so fascinated by the story. I had never seen anything like it before. Like, this was just Harley Quinn being not necessarily on her own from the beginning, but her and the Joker have a couple interactions, but it's never insinuated that, oh, you know, she's ever gonna fall for the Joker, this, that, and the other. She has the love of her life by the end of this story, and I think that that's pretty cool in itself, that we have this kind of version here where we see Harley kind of doing things herself from the beginning, rather than, you know, getting controlled for so many years by this certain abusive asshole.
I'm the Joker, baby!
And then moving on later down the line. And to see all these new characters get introduced, and a different perspective on a character like Ivy, who, you know, we get to see kind of more of her upbringing. She's an only child, and we see her parents a little bit in the third movie, but they're leaving to go on a trip without her because, yeah, they are abusive to her in a way, but at the same point in time, they kind of spoil her because she's got everything she wants. She's got a big house, she's got a butler, you know, so I guess they're not all bad to her all the time, but they definitely are kind of mentally abusive in a way, and that's why she doesn't necessarily respect them. So we kind of get to see her tough upbringing from, you know, her, I guess you can say, when I mean terrible life, because I know people are like, she grew up rich, how can it be terrible? People can grow up rich and have a terrible life. It just depends on how you live their life or how others make you live that life. And since she was kind of forced to be in that rich, snobby lifestyle, she's just, you know, still trying to find out who she truly is. And by the end of it, she does. So yeah, these 3 books right here Would definitely recommend. Start from the beginning, and trust me, by the third book in the end, you actually kind of be like, wow, that's it? Not in an unsatisfying way, but just in the fact that it's like, you still want to read more, you still want the story to continue, but it ends so perfectly that I don't think it needs to continue from here on out, and Rachel Allen did a good job giving us kind of a different perspective, a different story to this character and other characters, making it creative and different from anything that I've read in the past, whether it be from other books or comics. It's so addicting, and when a story's able to do that to me, it sticks in my head forever. So I absolutely love these books and would definitely recommend that you go ahead and get them yourself, whether you get them on audiobook or get them in stores or read them online somewhere, because I know you can do that. Just take time, about an hour or two out of your day, read the books, and trust me, you will get addicted midway through the first book, basically. I will say the story does start a little slow in the first book, but it gets there. And then after that, there's no slow start to these stories at all ever again in book 2 or 3. So that's it for me. Till then, enjoy yourselves. Hopefully you go check out these books, and I will catch you all in the next one.
Oh man. Batman, I'm begging you.